Faith when the world goes quiet, when certainty breaks. I want to say something out loud at the very beginning, because if I don't, some of you will tune out before we even start. Some of you listening right now do not consider yourselves Christian anymore. Some of you left a long time ago. Some of you didn't leave angrily. You just drifted. Some of you left because staying felt dishonest. Some of you found meaning somewhere else. In the land, in ancestors, in ceremony, in silence. Some of you don't know what you believe. You're tired of being told what you should. Some of you are still Christian, still praying, still believing. You're exhausted. You've done everything you were told to do. You've stayed faithful. You've tried to trust God. Quietly, you're wondering why it feels so empty. If you fall into any of these categories, I want you to hear this clearly. This is not a trap. This is not a sales pitch. This is not a guilt trip. I'm not here to pressure you into belief, scare you into agreement, or talk you out of your story. I'm here to tell the truth, carefully, because there's a moment almost everyone reaches, no matter what tradition they come from. It's the moment when certainty stops working. The prayers don't feel alive anymore. The words stop landing. The rituals feel hollow. The answers you memorized no longer help. Silence shows up. For some people, that silence leads them deeper into Christianity. For others, it leads them away from it. For others, it leads them back to older ways, to the land, the body, ancestors, to cycles that existed long before churches. Here's something important. Silence does not automatically mean you failed. Silence does not automatically mean God left. Silence does not automatically mean you chose wrong. Sometimes silence means something ended, not because it was false, but because it could only carry you so far. In many native traditions, silence is not treated as absence. It's treated as presence that does not explain itself. The land does not justify itself. The seasons do not answer questions. The ancestors do not shout instructions. They remain. And that should challenge us, because modern religion trained people to expect God to be loud, clear, and constantly reassuring. That expectation did not come from Scripture. It came from control. There's a line in the Bible that almost never gets preached. It says, "Truly, you are a God who hides himself," not disappears, not abandons, hides, which means silence is not a failure of faith. It's part of it. Even Jesus experienced this. On the cross, he didn't say, "Everything makes sense now." He said, "Why have you forsaken me?" That is not a polished religious statement. That's a human one. And if you left faith because it didn't allow questions like that, you didn't reject God. You rejected a version of God that couldn't survive honesty. And if you stayed but feel worn down, wondering why God feels far away, you didn't break your faith. You ran into its depth. Faith that cannot survive silence was never strong. It was just loud. What we're doing here, slowly, carefully, is learning how to talk about faith when the noise is gone. Not to force belief, but to make honesty possible again. For those who left faith and are cautiously curious again, this message is not for people who want to come back. It's for people who are curious and careful. People who left because staying felt dishonest. People who don't want certainty again. They want truth. People who are open but not naive. If that's you, I want to say this plainly. You don't have to undo your journey to explore faith again. You don't have to reject native spirituality, the land, ancestors, or silence to reconsider Jesus. Jesus does not compete with those things. The version of Christianity you left might have. Jesus didn't. Jesus never demanded certainty. He never pressured belief. He never chased people who walked away. He invited people to walk and let them choose. If you're curious again, start here. Not with doctrine, not with church, not with certainty. Start with honesty. Ask yourself, what did I actually lose when I left? What did I finally stop pretending about? What still feels unresolved? Not intellectually, relationally. Curiosity doesn't mean commitment. It means listening. And faith, real faith, always begins there. If Jesus is real, he can handle your caution. If God exists, he is not threatened by your boundaries. If truth matters, it will survive your questions. You don't need to rush. You don't need to decide. You don't need to arrive anywhere. Just stay honest. That's enough to begin again. Faith when the world goes quiet. Silence across traditions. If we're going to talk honestly about faith, we have to widen the lens for a moment. Because silence is not just a Christian experience. Silence shows up everywhere humans have tried to make sense of life. It shows up in deserts, grief, loss. It shows up when answers stop helping. In many native traditions, silence is not something to be fixed. It's something to be listened to. The land does not rush to explain itself. The mountains do not justify their existence. The seasons do not apologize for winter. They simply are. People learn to live in relationship with that reality, to notice patterns instead of demanding answers, to listen instead of interrogating, to wait instead of forcing. That posture matters, because one of the most damaging things modern religion did was confuse explanation with truth. It taught people that if something was true, it would always be explainable. That idea collapses the moment real life shows up. The land does not explain drought. The ocean does not explain storms. The body does not explain illness. Loss does not explain itself. Yet meaning still exists. Presence still exists. Relationship still exists. The Bible actually understands this better than most people realize. There's a deep current in Scripture that treats silence not as absence, as mystery. Think about Moses. God doesn't give Moses a philosophy lecture. God gives him a burning bush, something that cannot be reduced. Think about Job. God does not answer Job's questions. God gives Job a vision of scale, creation, weather, animals, time. Think about Elijah. No, Nala, God is not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the wind. God is in the stillness. Scripture is not embarrassed by mystery. People are. Institutions are, because mystery cannot be controlled. Control is what certainty-based faith was really about. Not truth, control. If God can be explained, God can be managed. If God can be predicted, God can be used. If God can be reduced to rules, God can be weaponized. Many of you listening left faith because you felt that weapon. You were told what to believe, how to behave, who was in, who was out. When life broke you open, those rules didn't help. They just judged you. So you went looking for something older, something quieter, something that didn't pretend. That makes sense. Here's where things get interesting. When you strip Christianity of its power structures, its fear-based language, and its obsession with certainty, what you find underneath is not that different from what many native traditions have always known. That faith is relational, that presence matters more than explanation, that walking is more important than arriving. The Bible rarely talks about belief the way modern people do. It talks about walking with God, listening, trusting, waiting. Even the word we translate as faith in Scripture is closer to trustworthiness than certainty. It's not having the right ideas, it's remaining loyal. Which brings us to something important. Silence reveals what kind of faith we were actually practicing. If your faith collapses the moment God stops explaining himself, it was never relational. It was transactional. Transactions always fail when one side stops delivering. Relationship doesn't depend on constant explanation. It depends on presence. This is why people who return to the land often say they feel grounded again. Not because the land answers questions, because the land does not lie. It does not promise what it cannot deliver. It does not manipulate, it simply remains. And that honesty heals something. Now, if you're a Christian and still listening, I want to say something carefully. This is not an attack on Christianity. This is an invitation to recover its depth. Because Jesus never promised constant clarity. He promised presence. I am with you, not I will explain everything. That phrase, with you, matters because presence does not eliminate pain. It makes pain survivable. That is where many people got lost. They were taught to expect God to remove pain, not to walk with them through it. So when pain stayed, faith felt like a lie. Jesus never said suffering would disappear. He said he would remain. Remaining is harder to notice than miracles. Remaining doesn't trend well on YouTube. Remaining doesn't sound impressive. Remaining looks like quiet faithfulness, quiet listening, quiet honesty. Silence becomes the place where that kind of faith either deepens or breaks. Here's the hard truth. Silence is not neutral. Silence will expose what you are trusting. If you are trusting certainty, silence will feel like abandonment. If you are trusting outcomes, silence will feel cruel. If you are trusting relationship, silence will feel painful, but not empty. And this is where many of you are right now. You're not anti-God, you're anti-pretense. You don't want to be lied to again. God does not ask you to be. The Bible itself contains protest, anger, lament, confusion, sadness. It does not silence those voices. It preserves them. Which means honesty is not a threat to faith. Dishonesty is. And silence, whether encountered in prayer, nature, loss, is not the enemy. For many people, it's the doorway. The doorway out of shallow belief. The doorway into something slower, truer, and harder to control. And that raises a question we can't avoid much longer. If certainty-based faith collapses, if transactional religion fails, if silence remains, what kind of faith is actually strong enough to survive? That's where we're going next. Faith when the world goes quiet. Why certainty faith collapses. What replaces it? There's a reason certainty-based faith feels so appealing. It promises relief from anxiety. It tells you if you believe the right things, if you follow the right rules, if you stay inside the lines, life will make sense. Certainty offers structure. Structure feels safe, especially when life is chaotic. Psychology helps us understand this. When humans experience fear, loss, or unpredictability, the nervous system looks for stability. Rules create predictability. Predictability lowers anxiety. Lower anxiety feels like peace. It isn't. It's control. Control works until it doesn't. Because life eventually introduces something certainty cannot manage. Illness, grief, trauma, injustice, loss that does not resolve. When that happens, certainty-based faith collapses. Not because God failed, because the structure was never strong enough to carry reality. This is where many people break. Not loudly, quietly. They stop praying, they stop expecting, they stop asking. Some walk away completely. Some stay, but go numb. Here's what I want to say clearly. That collapse is not weakness. It's exposure. It exposes what faith was actually doing for you. If faith existed to guarantee safety, silence destroys it. If faith existed to provide answers, mystery dismantles it. If faith existed to protect you from pain, suffering proves it false. That kind of faith was never what Jesus offered. It was what institutions offered. Because institutions require certainty to function. Certainty keeps people aligned. Certainty maintains authority. Certainty keeps systems stable. Certainty does not produce wisdom. It produces compliance. Compliance is not the same thing as trust. Trust requires freedom. Freedom requires uncertainty. That's why certainty-based faith always collapses eventually. Not because people stop believing in God, because they stop believing God is predictable. Here's the part that matters. When certainty collapses, something else has to take its place. You cannot live without some way of orienting yourself in the world. Some people replace certainty faith with cynicism. They decide nothing means anything. Some replace it with spirituality disconnected from accountability. Some replace it with rigid ideology, political, cultural, or personal. Some replace it with something quieter, relational trust. Not certainty, trust. Trust does not say, I know how this will turn out. Trust says, I don't know. I will stay. This is the kind of faith Scripture actually describes. Abraham does not know where he was going. He walks. Israel wanders in the desert. They complain, they doubt, they get lost. God stays. The Psalms are full of people who believe God exists and still accuse him of absence. Jesus himself does not explain suffering. He enters it, which means Christianity, at its core, is not an answer system. It's a presence story. God with us, not God explained to us. That difference is everything, because presence does not require certainty. Presence requires honesty. Honesty is what many of you were starving for when you left. You didn't want better answers. You wanted truth. Truth about pain. Truth about doubt. Truth about silence. And certainty faith could not give you that. So it collapsed. Collapse is not always destruction. Sometimes collapse is compost. Sometimes what breaks down becomes the soil for something truer. This is why people who leave faith often become more grounded, not less. They stop pretending. They stop using God as a shield. They stop lying to themselves. And that honesty is sacred, even if it led you away from church, especially if it led you away from pretending. Now here's the part that often gets missed. Relational faith does not replace certainty with nothing. It replaces certainty with presence. Instead of asking, what do I believe? It asks, who am I walking with? Instead of asking, is this true? It asks, is this trustworthy? And those are different questions. You can be uncertain and still be faithful. You can be confused and still be connected. You can be angry and still be in relationship. The Bible does not shame those states. Religion does. Which brings us back to Jesus, not the system built around him, the person. Jesus does not pressure belief. He invites relationship. He says, follow me. That word assumes movement. It assumes risk. It assumes you don't know exactly where you're going. Following is not agreeing. Following is walking. Walking requires trust, not certainty. If you're someone who left faith and are cautiously curious again, this matters. You don't have to rebuild certainty to explore Jesus. Jesus never demanded certainty in the first place. You don't have to undo your respect for land, ancestors, or silence. Jesus does not compete with those. He walks within them. Jesus prays in the wilderness. He retreats into solitude. He listens more than he speaks. The Jesus underneath the institution is far quieter than most people have been taught, and far more honest, which is why people trusted him. Not because he explained everything, because he stayed. That raises the question we've been circling. If faith is not certainty, if faith is not control, if faith is not answers, what does it actually look like to walk again? Not rush back, not recommit to systems, not force belief. Walk. That's where we're headed next. Faith when the world goes quiet. Jesus without the system. At this point, something important needs to be named. Many people did not walk away from Jesus. They walked away from a system that claimed to speak for him, a system that promised certainty, a system that demanded agreement, a system that confused obedience with control. When that system failed them, when life broke through the rules, it felt like God failed too. Those are not the same thing. Institutions need certainty to survive. They need boundaries. They need definitions. They need clarity about who belongs and who doesn't. And there is nothing inherently evil about structure. The problem is when structure pretends to be God, when rules replace relationship, certainty replaces trust, and fear replaces love. Jesus consistently resisted that, not subtly, openly. He healed on days he wasn't supposed to. He touched people he wasn't supposed to touch. He forgave people without permission from authorities. He spoke to women publicly. He ate with the wrong people. Over and over again, Jesus disrupted the systems that claimed to protect holiness. Here's what's important to notice. Jesus did not do this to be rebellious. He did it because systems had begun to harm people. They had turned faith into a transaction. If you do this, God will bless you. If you fail here, God will reject you. If you belong, you're safe. If you don't, you're not. Jesus dismantled that logic, not by writing a new rule book, by showing up differently. When people asked him for explanations, he often gave stories instead. When they demanded clarity, he invited trust. When they wanted control, he offered relationship. That frustrated everyone, especially religious leaders, because Jesus would not let himself be used as a tool. He refused to guarantee outcomes. He refused to validate power structures. He refused to simplify God. And this is where many people misunderstand him. They think Jesus came to make belief easier. He didn't. He came to make relationship possible, which is much harder. Relationship means vulnerability. It means uncertainty. It means risk. Jesus never hid that. He didn't say, "Follow me and everything will make sense." He said, "Follow me," and then walked into places where things made less sense. The wilderness, conflict, rejection, suffering, even death. Here's something that often gets missed. Jesus never chased people who walked away. There's a moment when a large group leaves him because his teaching is too hard. He doesn't soften it. He doesn't explain it again. He turns to his closest followers and asks a simple question. Do you want to leave too? That question matters because it shows us something about the heart of Jesus. He does not coerce faith. He does not manipulate loyalty. He does not trap people with fear. He allows freedom. Freedom means people can walk away, which many of you did. You were allowed to. You were not cursed for leaving. You are not abandoned. You are not rejected. You are exercising the freedom Jesus himself refused to take away. That matters because the God revealed in Jesus is not insecure. He does not need forced belief. He does not need coerced allegiance. He invites. An invitation always includes the possibility of refusal. If you're someone who left faith because it felt coercive, manipulative, or dishonest, you didn't betray Jesus. You may have actually honored him, because Jesus never wanted followers who stayed out of fear. He wanted people who chose relationship. Now, to the Christians who are still listening, tired, discouraged, holding on by a thread, this matters too. If your faith has felt heavy, oppressive, exhausting, it may not be because you're weak. It may be because you've been trying to carry a system Jesus never asked you to carry. Jesus says his burden is light, not because life is easy, because relationship is shared. A yoke is carried together, not alone, not perfectly, together. Systems cannot do that. Only presence can. That's why so many people rediscover something meaningful when they return to silence, land, body, or ancestors. Because those spaces do not demand performance. They do not require certainty. They do not threaten rejection. They allow you to exist. Jesus does the same. Underneath doctrine, underneath institutions, underneath centuries of misuse, there is a quiet Christ who walks, who listens, who weeps, who stays, not to explain suffering away, but to be present inside of it. And that raises a final question, the one everything has been moving toward. If Jesus does not promote clarity, guarantee outcomes, or demand certainty, why follow him at all? Why walk with him again or for the first time when the world stays quiet? That's where we're going next. Faith when the world goes quiet, choosing to walk again. Now we're standing in the place where nothing is being hidden anymore. No certainty to lean on, no system to blame, no explanations coming to rescue us. Just a quiet question that waits for an answer. Not shouted, not demanded, offered. The question is not, what do you believe? It's deeper than that. The question is, who are you willing to walk with when the world stays quiet? Because walking is different than deciding. Deciding feels final. Walking feels open.
No!
Deciding feels final. Walking feels open. Walking allows for pauses, for detours, for stopping altogether if you need to. Walking does not require certainty. It requires presence. And that's what Jesus always invited. Not arrival, not agreement, walking. When Jesus says, "Follow me," he is not asking people to sign on to a system. He is asking them to move their lives in his direction, slowly, honestly, freely. Here's what matters. Jesus does not wait for people to believe everything correctly before walking with him. He walks with doubters, skeptics, people who misunderstand him constantly, people who will eventually abandon him. He knows this. He still walks, which tells us something important. Jesus does not base relationship on performance. He bases it on presence. That's why following him never starts with certainty. It starts with willingness. Willingness to stay in the conversation. Willingness to not numb out. Willingness to not replace honesty with noise. For some of you listening, walking again does not mean returning to church. It does not mean readopting labels. It does not mean undoing your journey. Walking again might look like letting Jesus exist in the same space as the land you already love, the silence you already respect, the ancestors you already honor, because Jesus is not threatened by those things. He lived close to the earth. He prayed alone. He listened more than he spoke. He understood that truth is not always loud. Walking again might simply mean allowing curiosity without pressure, questions without punishment, presence without demand. For others of you, especially those who stayed Christian but are worn thin, walking again may mean releasing the version of faith that told you everything had to make sense, letting go of the belief that silence means failure, letting go of the fear that doubt disqualifies you. Walking again may look like trusting God without feedback, not because it feels good, because relationship matters more than resolution. There's a line in the Hebrew scriptures that says, "Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vine, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, yet I will remain." That's not optimism. That's loyalty. Not loyalty built on outcomes. Loyalty built on relationship. Loyalty does not mean pretending everything's okay. It means staying honest when it's not. This is where faith becomes quiet. Not fragile, quiet. The kind of faith that does not announce itself, does not argue, does not demand agreement. The kind of faith that simply walks, however. If you are someone who left faith a long time ago and are cautiously curious again, I want to say this clearly, without agenda. You do not owe God certainty. You do not owe the church agreement. You do not owe anyone a decision. Curiosity is not betrayal. Questions are not rebellion. Silence is not rejection. If God is real, truly real, then he is not threatened by your pace. If Jesus is who Christians claim he is, then he is capable of walking with you exactly where you are, not where someone thinks you should be. Walking again might simply mean allowing yourself to say, I'm open. That's enough. If you are someone who never left, but feels tired and discouraged, I want to say this too. You are not failing because faith feels quieter than it used to. You are not weak because certainty faded. You may be growing. The loud faith of early belief often gives way to the quiet faith of endurance, not because something was lost, but because something was refined. Faith that survives silence is stronger than faith that depends on noise. Wherever you are, believer, former believer, spiritual, unsure, I want to leave you with this invitation: not to decide, not to commit, not to resolve anything today, just to walk honestly, to refuse to lie to yourself, others, and God, refuse to numb out, to refuse to reduce God or the mystery of existence to something manageable. If the world stays quiet, who will you walk with? Will you allow yourself to walk slowly and carefully? That's enough. That's faith. Not the loud kind, the real kind.